How many of you guys are private industry? That's all. Okay, good, because we're gonna, we get asked fairly frequently, from tiered permit facilities, can you help me fill out the forms? The forms, and we're going to go through all the forms. The forms for tiered permitting are really easy. That's not what you need to. You focus on the forms. That's not the tough part. The tough part is deciding what kind of waste you have. What are its characteristics? How variable is that waste stream? How consistent is it? Where does it fit on that all-important flow chart? What kind of treatment are you doing? How many treatment units might you have? And how do you make the distinction between, what's 1 versus 2 versus 3 units? Where do you fit on the tier? Then you start filling out the forms. By the time you start doing the checklist and fill out the forms, you've already done a bunch of work figuring out where you ought to be. And we're going to be focusing a lot on that. And there's a lot of, prerequisites before you start figuring out what tier you're in. And understanding tiered permitting, you need to understand a number of things. Point of generation. What kind of waste do you have? What are you actually doing to the waste? Is it actually treatment? Is that treatment exempted or regulated? So it's a way of thinking about what's actually happening, and it might not be so obvious. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. Let's get these off the. Mm-hmm. Is this okay? How would you know? How do you know? For those of you who have been in the class before, how do you know if this is okay or not? Yeah, doesn't it? All right, well, there's something chemically, physically going on there. How do you know? Well, what kind of waste is it? What is that? Is exploding out of a test tube on the flow chart? If it's air reactive waste, go to the flow chart, exploding out of a test tube, I'm in conditional authorization, then it's okay. But if not, it's not on the flow chart.
It has to be listed. If it's not listed, it's not allowed. Okay. So our outline, we've got block 1, the big picture. So what are we looking for? Basics, what is it? Is it in, is it out? What's tiered permitting all about? So we're just kind of discussing, giving you guys a step back to think about what treatment is so you recognize it. I've had a couple different people call me from the state saying, I was out inspecting this business and I saw this. Is that treatment? Are they treating it? As an inspector, you have to be able to recognize it because the business might be doing it without even thinking about it. And so for them, to them it almost seems like part of their process. But point of generation is really key on this because it may say, at that point, it is a waste. It's not a processed material. And if they're doing something to it after it becomes a waste, that's treatment of a waste. So as inspectors, we need to make you guys be able to recognize that. Then we're going to talk about meat and potatoes, tiered permitting compliance, what's involved, what do you need, what do the different tiers require, and inspection, special issues, situations, not just regulations and adventure. So we'll cover that stuff, and then the last is kind of a wrap-up. We've kind of reduced the presentation down. We've struggled in the past in finishing this because this really is an 8-hour class. And 4 hours is a long time for you guys to sit in here. And in the past, we've always taught this class at 1 o'clock, so we've always been dealing with food coma. So now we're hoping that the Java high that you guys are on is going to carry you through the next 4 hours. But
tempered by the need to get to your lunch table before 10:30, because otherwise the room fills up.
That's right. So we're going to make every effort, Steve, right?
Is it chicken NOS?
Chicken NOS or beef NOS? Not sure.
Is beef NOS tomorrow? Because I'm bringing the special barbecue sauce for tomorrow. I don't know. All right, so remember, we always have to do the evaluation. Remember, evaluations are important. You wouldn't think so because we're back for the but evaluations are important, and of course, this is the electronic Coupa conference. Go to the kiosks, do it online, get out your iPad, and however you work those things. Please make sure you do evaluations both at conference as well as our tiered permitting class. And be as specific as you can. You know, if you want something covered, if you don't need something covered, if, you know, whatever. Comments, corrections, additions, deletions, criticisms, please be as specific as you can. That really does help us. You know, don't just say, this sucked. We know that. Why? So maybe we can change something.
Yeah. This is your class. We care about the training that you guys are getting. We want to make it so it's beneficial to you. You know, we get paid $0 for being up here. So, you know, we want you guys to get something out of it. If there was something you wanted.
We don't even get paid enough to buy a beer. By the Koopa people. And we love almost all of you. Some more than others, but all of you. So, you know, we're talking about point of generation and other things. If you're a relatively new hazardous waste inspector, or, you know, from industry, if you're relatively new to the hazardous waste field, there's going to be things in here you're not going to understand because we're not going to be covering them in depth. There's other classes here. You should have a fairly good handle on hazardous waste classification. So we talk about liquid wastes, we talk about, you know, different classifications of waste, toxic waste, reactive waste. You should know what those are because we don't really cover them in here. We do mention point of generation because what counts is what counts after that waste has been generated. But in the advanced hazardous waste generator class, I think Leon is going to be covering point of generation in much more detail,
right,
until his voice gives out. You know,
we don't cover recycling regulations.
We don't cover recycling. You know, you should go to well, you should have gone to either ours from a few years ago or Charles and Diana's hazardous waste recycling class. You need that a couple of times, just because it's so complicated. That's an exclusion or exemption from tiered permitting, but that's a 2-day class,
right?
You know, that we're not going to cover. So. And we're going to mention sampling, and we're going to mention hazardous waste tank systems with regard to the PE assessment, but no details. That's covered in other classes. We have a hard enough time getting out of here on time. There you go. And we're not satisfied until you're not satisfied. Customer service.
So the big picture, is it a waste? Am I doing anything to it? So we're going to cover a lot of different scenarios. Are you doing something? Is it covered? So kind of get right now out of the mindset of tiered permitting, and let's just kind of talk about treatment. Is it treatment? And then we'll discuss whether it's covered or not covered. Is the treatment regulated? What specific kind of waste is it? Is it a RCRA waste? Is it California waste? Those are important questions. And is the specific treatment waste combo eligible for tiered permit? So kind of start at the beginning. Look at what you have, what is it, what are you doing to it, and is it covered?
Yeah, this is not in a flowchart fashion. I think we were too lazy to put it in that. But think of this as the flow of what you're trying to determine. Is it a waste? Yes. Is it hazardous? Yes. Are you doing something to it that's treatment? Yes. Is that treatment regulated or exempt? It's regulated. Okay, now is it eligible? You know, and at any point in that chain, if it's like, well, no, it's not a waste, well, then you're done. So again, I'm doing all this treatment to this stuff. Is it a hazardous waste? Well, no. Then it doesn't count.
Right.
Right. We get calls all the time from people. Hey, you know, I have particularly like oily water wastes. You know, it takes a lot of oil to kill a fish. Right. So you know, people say, yeah, I've got this oil water separator, and here's what I'm doing with it. You know, so I need a tiered permit. Well, wait, is it hazardous waste? Well, yeah, you know, I have to bring in the vacuum truck and I have to suck out the floating oils out of there all the time. And that's a used oil, hazardous waste. No. Is the waste going in there hazardous? Well, it's only, you know, 0.5% of oil. Run a fish kill, doesn't kill fish. Run the metals, it's fine. It's not a hazardous waste. You're not treating a hazardous waste. You're removing a hazardous waste. So you really need to go through, you know, step by step, you know, before you get to the other stuff.
So why do you care? As an inspector, you want to make sure that you fully understand the questions. Yeah, I think for a lot of years, the inspectors just have gotten lost on this. And so they go out to the facility and they look and they basically agree with whatever the business is doing. So if you don't understand this, you can't audit them. And it's, again, it's not easy. Are you confident with the answer? So they're telling you they're doing things. You have to be able to verify those things. Well, where do you verify? How do you verify? We're going to give you those tools. And it's just not knowing the answer, but understanding the process of how the answer was found. So you need to be able to go into a facility and audit them. And we found when we took over the program that it was a lot of cleanup initially to get the businesses dialed right, because they were lost, they didn't understand. They tried to fill out the forms, they tried to classify themselves, but it was not accurate.
Sites. All right, so again, sort of first things first. Just understanding the nature of treatment, and at first, you need to think about is what's happening to whatever it is they're doing with the stuff. You need to think about it in a chemical, physical, biological basis. Is what's happening to that material, is it a chemical, physical, biological change in its character or characteristics? Right? You need to take the broad view initially. Later, it's like, okay, is it treatment that's regulated? All right, so first you want to think about is what's happening treatment. And really what treatment is, chemical, physical, biological treatment of a waste requires a permit or some grant of authorization. Right? And the permit by rule program, the tiered permit program, is essentially a grant of authorization. If the facility is doing what's covered under the regulations or under the statute, they're considered to have a grant of authorization, essentially by filling out the paperwork and getting it into CUPA. Of course, storage and disposal, meaning, storage over, 30, storage over 90 days or 180 days for SQGs, certainly requires a permit. All we care about in here is on-site treatment of on-site generated waste. If something gets shipped off-site or you're receiving waste from off-site, that's a different set of permits. All we're talking about is on-site treatment of on-site generated waste. There's a bunch of broad EPA RCRA exemptions for treatment permits. There's a lot of stuff that you can do in that a facility can do in California to its waste that requires a tiered permit that EPA exempts. But it has to be EPA exempt treatment for it to qualify for tiered permits. And we're going to talk about those EPA exemptions. And pretty much almost everything is EPA exempt in the on-site waste treatment world. Right? So you just have to recognize, the facilities just need to recognize what those are. We're going to talk about those later. There are some narrow DTSC exemptions. We're going to talk about those. Some of those are recycling based. But, we're going to talk about those. And this whole thing started back in 1993 with AB 1772, where before that, anybody who wanted to treat a hazardous waste on site, what did they have to get? Either full TSD facility permit from DTSC, good luck with that, or a variance, good luck with that. Because they're just massive permits and applications. So legislation changed, now we have the tiered permit program, and it's been out there for almost 20 years now.
Yeah, 20.
20. Do we get a T-shirt that says 20 years? 20
if
years.
we made it.
20 years of TP. It's like that doesn't.
All right. So what is tiered permitting? If we look at the permit world, the large permits, the ones that are issued by the state, that is a standardized permit. That's for non-RCRA waste, or a full Part B permit, which is for RCRA waste. So if they're treating from off-site generated waste, or they're not operating under the lower tiers, that's the upper tier. So the CUPAs do not have authority under those top standardized and full permit. And then the next one would be permit by rule. And what permit by rule means is if you follow the rules, you get a permit. On the upper ones, what you do is you submit an application. The state reviews your application. If they approve your application, then you can get approval and a permit. So there's no real criteria. You could come up with your own technology for treatment of waste, submit it to the state, and get approval. Under permit by rule, you have to follow already established treatment criteria. So if you do that, you're granted the permit. You still have to do things, you still get notification, but there's no review process. You submit it, You follow it, you get it. So that's why it's called permit by rule. Conditionally authorization means that if you follow the conditions, you get authorization. And again, it's lower than the permit by rule. These are more special situations, like it's really hazardous stuff, but you're dealing with very small volumes. Or it might be large volumes, but it's not very hazardous material. Then the lowest one are conditionally exempts. And they have the least amount of requirements, and they're pretty much for special applications. There's one for specific waste streams, there's small quantity treater, there's a limited, and there's commercial laundry. And those have almost no requirements for them. It's basically making notification and then following those rules. I have a question already?
On the forms, on some of the forms that you're creating, I see the word facility permit. What does that mean? Is that talking about tiered permitting or the full permit standard?
No, we're going to go through some of the forms. I'm trying to think specifically in what context that's in.
By definition, in Title 22, a facility is a TSDF.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, and again, as Steve said, there's requirements typically for the lower tiers in the 22 CCR regulations.
No, opposite.
You see, they're in both. All right. But it's not clear. If you do tiered permitting, I would recommend that you print out the relevant regs and put them in a notebook and get the latest copy of the relevant regs and statute. Get them online and just put them in there. Use lots of sticky notes because you're going to be flipping back and forth. We were going through recently updating our materials. Not that you could tell. We were going through our materials and all that stuff. And I'm sitting here on the computer, and he's got this notebook with pages everywhere, footnotes everywhere. So, where is it? Flip, flip, flip. It's in here. Wait, no, it's not. Flip, flip, flip.
Hard to find.
What happens? We did not have our scotch till after.
No.
All right, so again, it's hazardous waste treatment. For tiered permit to apply, what does it have to be? It has to be a waste. That waste has to be hazardous. And again, it has to be treated in a manner that's RCRA exempt, that's covered by the tiered permit requirements in the flow chart, and not otherwise exempt. So again, these are some of the questions that as Steve mentioned before, it doesn't apply to anything that's a processed material. Now, whether it's considered part of the process, as part of the process chain rather than a waste, that's open to interpretation. And I think they kind of went through some examples in the recycling class, and that can be more of an interpretation than a hard and fast, black and white, bright line determination. And it may be for you facility folks, the more proof and documentation and I guess defensible explanation you have, the better you'll be able to convince the tiered permit inspector, no, this isn't a waste, I'm not treating a waste, this is part of the overall process. We're going to talk very shortly about that, or we're going to talk a little bit about that. But if it's part of the process, it's not treatment. And when we go through some of the examples of treatment, reasonable people can disagree on some of these. A lot of what it has to do is with intent, right? And again, it's not covered under the flow chart. The last time that flow chart was updated, probably 3-4 years ago.
I think it was 10.
Probably 3 years ago, yeah. Some tweaks for cyanide. All right, so, okay, it's a waste. All right, well, the facility, okay, we have a waste. It's not processed material. We have a waste. So as part of waste determination, what needs to be determined is specifically what category, what type of waste is it? How do you determine what your waste is? How does a facility determine what are the methods that a facility can use? Okay, you can use laboratory analysis, permanent lab, what else?
Process knowledge.
Use knowledge of the process, knowledge of the materials, right? For a lot of waste, can you just kind of pull that out of the air? Oh yeah. Yeah, I've got my flammable liquid waste. I'm cleaning with alcohol, and I have alcohol residue. Well, what kind of waste is it? It's an ignitable waste. How do you know it's alcohol? What else is in there? Nothing. I'm just washing off stuff, just a little bit of grease, but it's alcohol. It's flammable waste. That may be fine for a lot of wastes. That may be fine for a lot of areas of tiered permitting. But and we're going to go through this again later, but for some wastes and for some types of treatment, a lab analysis is going to be necessary because you may need to determine what the metals concentration is, what the acid concentration is. You know, and unless you're some kind of lab savant where you can look and see, oh yeah, there's 1,320 parts per million metals in there, you're going to need a lab to do that. And if you find a guy who can do that with their mind, let me know because I need a subcontractor, right? And for the CUPA folks, you're going to want to ask, well, what kind of proof is there? What kind of evidence and documentation? You know, there's no, with the exception of the higher tiers, there's no real requirement to have written proof or documentation as to how they made that determination. No real waste analysis plan requirement. There is for the higher tiers. But for any of the tiers, one of the questions is going to be for you is how do you know what kind of waste it is? Well, that's what it is. Well, how did you determine that?
Right.
Well, I guessed. Well, what was that guess or estimate based on? You know, again, proof and documentation, though it may not be specifically required, you, the CUPA, need to have, you know, a sense of comfort and a sense of, you know, sense of security that, yeah, what, you know, the waste determination that was made is valid and is representative. So you may want to ask that. For you facilities, you may want to have more than just a guess. So keep that in mind. And why is all this important? Why do you need to know what kind of waste you have in the tiered permit world? In general, what tier a facility falls under for their treatment is based on three things. What kind of waste it is and the characteristics and its classification, what type of treatment or whether the treatment method's being used, and the volumes per day, per batch, per facility. It's really based on those three things. Based on those three, that was the European three. Based on those three things. The higher the hazard, the higher the tier. The higher the volume, the higher the tier. The more types of treatment techniques or methods, the higher the tier. All right, so it is important. And then, as we've been mentioning, other issues, where is that point of generation? Because that may change the classification. Where is that stuff actually being generated? You know, and what's the characteristics at that point, which is what counts. We use that clarifier as an example. There are dilution issues. Is dilution the solution to pollution? Maybe not, but it may be a righteous treatment technique. Right? It depends on whether that's intentional or not. If it's intentional, is that going to be treatment? Probably. So you need to look at what's that overall generating process, not just the point of generation, but what is the process of generating? To see, well, what's happening with that? Is something getting diluted as part of the process? If so, fine, then that's the waste. If it's, well, there's no process reason why it's being diluted, then your point of generation is up further, and now that dilution becomes part of the treatment. Right? So it really depends. So when you're doing a tiered permit inspection, or you're reviewing the materials, you can't just focus on the treatment system itself. You have to walk upstream. Right? You have to look at what's the generating process and understand that before you can really do a good tiered permit inspection.
Yeah, and an example is, you may be trying to get to one of the lower tiers, and the criteria for doing that is based on the concentration of the waste. So you're going to have to do laboratory analysis to make a determination that it fits within that lower tier. So if you're doing sampling, what's the minimum number of samples that you need to take to get a statistically valid result? 3. So 3 is that you can't do less than 3 samples. So if you're an inspector and they're saying, well, I'm not PBR, I'm CA because the concentration of my waste is low, they need to be able to prove that to you. So let me see the lab results. They can't use generator knowledge. How do you use generator knowledge to determine that the concentration is low? I mean, it's easy when you're doing waste determination to use generator knowledge to say it's corrosive or to say it's reactive or something like that. But when you have to determine the concentration to get within a tier, you can't do that by knowledge. You need to do that by analysis. Yes.
Is PP exempt or different than sampling and
Well, that's something that you might have to use. You know, typically they don't have non-homogeneous waste streams. They're typically more of a homogeneous waste stream. So the methods in SW 846 is really for making determination on non-homogeneous waste. But I mean, it's the standard for how you go about to do something to validate it. So
they should, you know, any waste sampling and analysis should follow SW 846 or
You know.
before sampling.
or similar righteous right. But, you know, if it's, and we're going to get to this later, much later, but we're going to talk specifically about sampling. No, we're going to talk specifically about sampling and where around that chain of generation and treatment.
we're going to spend time on that.
Do you sample, and depending on where you sample and what the reason for those samples are, you may need to do an SW 846 conformant sampling and analysis, particularly for hazardous waste regulatory reasons. Others where you don't, you could use indicator paper, you could use generator knowledge. Other areas where it's not necessarily SW 846, but you may need to use a sanitation district certified laboratory if it's a, so it really depends. Obviously, the more rigorous the sampling and testing methodology, the more that you could rely on those samples, right? And we're not talking about, there's a big waste pile over there. We need to figure out what it is. So you're really going to be doing the, statistical sampling plan and so forth. When we get into the higher tiers, we're going to talk about waste analysis plans. So we may hit that there. Yeah.
There's a really good RCRA document specifically about developing a waste analysis plan for facilities that's probably more accurate.
And PBR needs that, so that would be an excellent document because the regulations in Title 22 don't go into a lot of detail. And it's one of the things that's typically very confusing for businesses to meet. Because who has to do a waste analysis plan? Where does that requirement come from? Who's required to do that? A facility is required. So those are the people that are in the business of treating hazardous waste. That is their industry. So that's where that requirement comes from. But those people understand that because that's their livelihood. But a business operating under permit by rule, that is not what they are. They're something else, and they want to do treatment on site of their waste. So they don't typically have their own laboratory. They don't have their own environmental division. So a guidance document is a great resource for that.
Yeah. And a lot of generators may need to look at that guidance document and tailor it to their much simpler operations. There may be facilities where a one-page waste analysis plan is sufficient. Small type. But, they may not need a 40-page document on the other hand as well. And we have an example of one that we wrote for a simple facility.
So what's ineligible? What can't you treat? So things that anything generated from off-site has to be on-site generated. Reactive wastes are not allowed. So what is a reactive waste? What's that?
Gives off a poisonous gas.
Yeah, that's one. If mixed with water, gives off a toxic gas. How about some others? Pyrophoric is an example. How about explosives? How about water reactive? Okay, so those are some examples of reactive waste. We don't see a lot of reactive waste at businesses. Why? Well, typically people that handle dangerous stuff, they buy it dangerous, they run it through a process, and it becomes neutralized through the process. The example would be unstable reactive catalysts. As a raw material, that catalyst may be very reactive, but after it goes through a process, it's not going to be reactive anymore. So a lot of times we don't see reactive waste. Probably one of the biggest reactive wastes that we saw was cyanide, because that was prevalent in the plating industry. And so they made a special exception for that, and now cyanide is included under tiered permitting. But the other ones are not. And extremely hazardous waste. And we should have a ginormous prize. I don't even, what do we have? Do we have anything?
Yes, we do.
All right. If somebody can tell me what an extremely hazardous waste is.
An example or the definition?
The definition. What is it federal or state?
State.
Okay, very good. So that's the state. And what is the criteria?
Is it a really low LD50?
That's one. What is it? Oh,
Gosh.
that's a bonus. Give him a whole pack if you can. It's 50, so you're very close. Like, I would give him a... He can't throw it because he was bowling last night. He has no arm strength. So, yeah, extremely hazardous waste is something that that most people don't understand. It is covered in my toxicity class tomorrow. So there's a little promotion for me tomorrow.
That is the best toxicity class you will ever go to. He passes around toxic stuff for you to touch and look at. Don't lick it, but you can touch it.
True story.
Great class.
I've got toxic examples. So extremely hazardous. It's extremely hazardous waste. It has a low LD50, LC50, LD for dermal. It is one of the carcinogens at a much higher concentration.
Now, one of the 16 righteous OSHA carcinogens. Not one of the 590 California Prop 65 carcinogens.
Right.
Right. So, and if you're going to go away on vacation, you're concerned about carcinogenic exposure, and you go to Lake Tahoe, stay on the Nevada side because you're exposed to way less carcinogens there, except cigarette smoke because they smoke like fiends in Nevada. Right.
I got one question on extremely hazardous waste. What hydrochloric acid is considered an extremely hazardous waste, but it's usually sold commercially at 48% or less in water. And it's extremely hazardous because of its water reactivity. But it's sold in water.
And that's a good point. If you recall...
Is it hydrogen fluoride or hydrofluoric acid?
Hydrofluoric acid. But
Okay.
if you look at your Appendix 10, Appendix 11, one
10.
of them appendices, right? You see all these, the hazardous waste, those that are listed by chemical or common name, those with an asterisks on them, those are considered extremely hazardous. But remember, in California, a hazardous waste, they're all presumptive hazardous waste. They are presumed to be hazardous unless you determine that they're not, right? So if hydrofluoric acid's got that asterisk on there, right, it's extremely hazardous. It's listed because it's right. So, certainly more concentrated, hydrofluoric acid is going to be water reactive. If the hydrofluoric acid, 48% in water that you're using, if it doesn't meet the criteria for extremely hazardous, then it's not extremely hazardous.
Unfortunately, there's no SW846 method for reactivity.
There is not.
And this is a problem that a lot of the silicon conductor industries raised 20 years ago and still has not been resolved.
My suggestion...
I haven't heard that before. I've never heard that. I don't know why it could be listed for various things. It could be the toxicity. It could be an LD50.
It's listed with the R behind it for reactivity.
Yeah.
For reactivity.
Right. I mean, and it's going to be the same EPA issue because it's basically, with the exception of the toxicity criteria, the water reactivity generating a toxic gas, explosive, unstable. It's the same criteria for RCRA reactive wastes. The industry groups, because this may be a problem for example, for fab shops across the country, the industry group may want to get together, shoot a note up to EPA, and say, look, what kind of criteria may we use? Is there testing methodology? And the industry group get together and fund a study.
Actually, I have some letters that went back and forth back in the early 90s that did just that.
Yeah.
But, now it's 20 years later, people are starting to forget.
Yeah, but until they rescind those letters are still good. And for you Koopas, keep in mind that California has not been good at all about writing interpretive letters, guidance memos, and all that. EPA is fabulous about that. If you go to the RCRA online search engine in the advanced tab, you can pretty much search on any keyword, any particular regulatory section, and there's a boatload of EPA guidance memos and interpretive letters, etc. And those have value. You know, those certainly have value. So facilities need to know, Coupas need to know, you know, to determine is this, for example, a reactive waste or a liquid waste or not.
Okay.
All right, so, you know, going back to, okay, is what we're doing treatment? There's the generic, well, what is treatment from a chemical physical basis, right? Changing the chemical character or chemical physical biological characteristics. Well, that's simple. Changing pH, you're changing its chemical characteristics, right? Changing the concentration of metals, right? Some kind of, you know, equation going on, right? That's pretty simple. But how about one of the other criteria, changing characteristics? That's broader, isn't it? Right? What if you take a drum and you crush it? Have you changed its characteristics? No, it's still a steel drum. Have you changed its character? Well, it's kind of flat now. That's pretty broad. You know, when you look at what the statutory definitions of treatment, because it has to meet the statutory definition. You know, Health and Safety Code 251.23.5.
Treatment is any method that's designed to change
Look at these words. To change a
physical, chemical, or biological character.
Character. How do you change somebody's character? Put some drinks in to change it.
Or composition of any hazardous waste or material. See, that's another one. Or material contained therein. Or, and then look at
this last one, or which reduces its harmful properties or characteristics for any purpose. So, you have a hazardous waste, and it's pH 0.5. And you need a facility that's going to be taking it off-site, that's accepting it. Like, nah, we don't take anything under 1.5. All right. You throw in a little bit of sodium bicarb, you throw in a little, carefully, you throw in a little bit of, you know, some kind of hydroxide, and you bump that pH from 0.5 to 1.5. Have you treated that waste? It's still corrosive. Have you treated the waste? Yeah. You've changed its chemical character or characteristics for the purpose of somebody being able to take it for treatment or disposal. Even though it's still a corrosive waste, you haven't changed how it's classified, you haven't changed its nature at all. So keep that in mind. You know, you may think, I'm not treating, I'm just making it okay for those guys to take. The challenge that we're going to get now, what you want to figure out is, well, all right, so it's treatment according to 251.23.5. Now we need to look for any kind of exemption. Because what the legislature takes away, they give back some. And again, there's a bunch of specific exemptions for treatment types and techniques and methodologies. Right? So at first it's like, yes, it's treatment. Let's look to see if we can find some exemptions. We're going to get to those very shortly.
And then in 251.79.2e, treatment is any method, technique, or process that changes the physical, chemical, or biological character or composition of any hazardous waste. And by that change, the waste becomes non-hazardous, significantly less hazardous, or suitable for land disposal because of removal or reduction of undesirable
properties. How specific is that? It's not.
Right.
So how about, you know, can you send out for landfill disposal a liquid waste? Oh, come on. No. You know, you can't land dispose free liquids. That changed in
long time ago.
In mullet hair days. I got to look around first before I say that. You know, but I'm not. Yeah, if I want more hair, I just look in the drain. Yeah. So what about putting in some kind of solidification agent in that container of waste to solidify it before it gets land disposed? Is that treatment? Yeah. Right? So again, these are very, very broad. So you want to think, yeah, chemical, physical, biological change, but it's like, well, why are you doing this? Well, I'm not treating it. Why are you doing this? Well, because then I can have it disposed of cheaper. That's any purpose. Right? Very, very broad.
All right. So there's treatment in Health and Safety Code 25123.5 and 25179E. Very broad, widely applicable. but not all treatment is regulated. Many activities falling into treatment, defined above, are exempt, excluded from being regulated as treatment per the Health and Safety Code. So we're going to cover those in detail. And that's, again, why this is such a great document to have, because you're going to have all of these exemptions all compiled together. You don't have to go looking all over the place. More specifics later. First, get into the general broad idea.
Yes, if I was smart, I would write an application for the app like I exempt or I treat. But I'm stupid, so I don't. And I have to continue to work. All right, so let's play, is it treatment or not? So, how about neutralization? Treatment? Yeah. Flocculation? Yes. Precipitation? Yes. Filtering? Yes. Ooh,
Light show.
How about ion exchange?
Does this happen at businesses? They have water treatment systems with ion exchange?
Yeah, now that's treatment, right? Exchanging ions, right? Do they need a tiered permit? No, why? Exemptions, but it's still treatment.
Right.
Right? How about
Adsorption. How about regenerating the resins?
yeah?
It's not perfect for a topic, but let's say I'm a water treatment company, and I send me...
Which one? What jurisdiction? What's the address? And do you need consulting help?
And let's say my client goes out of business.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, I'll take all that media, spent media back from you. You have a problem with that?
Is the spent media a hazardous waste? What is that media? Resins with some ions in it, right?
Had a lot of metals in it.
Perhaps. Perhaps. You may want to regenerate it before you take those back. That we could talk about that at a break or over a beer, but that is an interesting question.
Yeah.
Does it meet the hazardous waste characteristics?
Well, and I won't mention that it had other hazardous waste labels.
Right, but well, it's still the same question. You have this gunk here, right? You have this stuff here, right? Is it a waste? Yeah, it has no further use or reuse intended unless it's treated or recycled, right? It can't be used as is. All right, is it a hazardous waste? I don't know. It doesn't meet the characteristics. Does it have? Does it fail the TTLC? Does it fail the TCLP? Does it fail the STLC for soluble, total, and then extractables? Does it fail that, or metals, or whatever other characteristics you're looking at? So that's where you go through a waste determination on that stuff. Is it a waste? Is it a hazardous waste?
So if it is a waste, then you got to look at, what are you doing to it? Are you treating it?
Or if you just bring, it's a waste, and it's hazardous, has all these metals, and it fails the test. So I'm going to take it, bring it back to my facility. If that's a hazardous waste, what are you now doing with that hazardous waste in the container? You're transporting it from a facility. You better have a TSD facility permit, or be able to meet the Health and Safety Code 25143.2, one of those B, C, or D exemptions, and that's a Charles Cochran.
Right. We're not covering that.
No, we're not. Yes, sir.
Your ion exchange example threw me off. Ion exchange, very common.
Yeah.
Water treatment.
Yeah.
You're treating water.
Yes, you are.
It's not hazardous waste. You're not treating a hazardous waste. You're treating water.
If you're treating water.
Right now, we're just trying to get you guys to think about treatment, not so much treatment of waste. We're just talking about treatment, not hazardous waste treatment.
I've got a couple of clients who are treating dilute plating solutions. Many times it's water. Many times it's not. And certainly the regeneration is involving chemicals. But the process is treatment. We'll get to, is it regulated treatment later, but it is treatment.
Right.
Yeah, particularly for plating shops, they're using that ion exchange as the final polishing step, and maybe using that water back.
Yeah. I've got a number of clients that do that.
Be very careful to regenerate those resins on a pretty short time frame, so it doesn't build up the hazardous waste levels in there. Otherwise, Garrett Callahan or whoever's doing the regeneration, the acid wash regeneration, could be treating hazardous waste without a permit.
Right. But we'll talk about that. That regeneration is treatment as well. We're going to get later, is it one of the exempt treatments? Yeah. Don't cheat. All right. Gravity separation. Treatment. Is it a physical change? Yeah. How about sieving? Yes. How about seething? How about heating? What do you bet this guy knows about tiered permits? Guaranteed. What about biological degradation?
How about laundry? Is that treatment? Yeah. How about passive evaporation, solar?
Is there salt in that?
Well, we're just saying whether it's treatment or not.
Anyone from San Diego County? This is one of your guys.
Steve, remember we got this later on.
No, I know, but I mean that's one. That's one. I can see you sitting over there in the corner.
She needed juice.
Yeah.
How about washing?
Yeah.
What do you? Well. Hold on to your questions. Think about the physical process of washing. Right? What do you do when you're washing? What are you doing? You're washing the dirt off, right? Is that a physical change? Yes. Yeah, it is. Right? You know, and depending on what you're washing off, right? Soap, right? That's a ponification, and you're getting the grease off, right? Yeah, it's treatment. Does anybody regulate that? We'll get to that later. Because in general, what are you washing? What are you putting in them parts washers? Parts. So the removal of gunk off of a part, are you treating a waste? Or is that part of a process? Part of a process. That's a generation process. You're not putting parts in there to treat a waste. You're putting parts in there to get the gunk off. So even though that washing is a physical process, in some cases a chemical process, but generally a physical process where you're changing the character of something. The thing is, what you're washing is part of the process. You're not washing a waste. That's called decontamination. But we'll get to that later too. Right? So again, first, just think, is it chemically, physically, what's going on? Is this treatment? I have my eyes closed. Is it treatment? Or not? It is. But then you get to later on, is it regulated or not? Is it excluded because, well, that's part of the process. So you're starting to think about, yeah, it's washing, it's doing this, it's doing that, but that's part of the process, so you don't care about it for tiered permitting. All right?
And then absorption. Is it treatment? Yeah. How about crushing?
For a tasty fireball, who's this? Oh, come on.
Somebody said it, I heard it. The crusher.
The crusher.
Question.
Somebody lied.
I heard crusher.
How about rinsing pesticide containers? Triple rinsing it. When people have pesticide or herbicide containers, what should they be doing with those empties? Triple rinse it into where? Back into the process, right? Back into the stuff that they're going to use. But is that active rinsing? Is that treatment? Yeah, changing the character, right? What about shredding? This is why I have to shop at Costco. Fish shredding. All right. Have you guys seen? I think they're the manufacturer they make them. They're called Muffin Monsters. It's these big, gigantic, 5 million horsepower steel shredders, right? Those big steel teeth. Things. You could put cars in there. It eats it up. Put a couch in there. It eats it up, right? Somebody posted a YouTube video of that thing running backwards, and said, "Look, there's this miraculous machine that make." And there are people like, "Wow, that's great." Do they make a small one? What a bunch of morons.
So, if it's treatment, how about rinsing alkaline cleaners off parts? I think we kind of covered that. It's part of a process, but it is treatment. Running parts through rinse tanks. changing pH from 1 to 4.2, you know, that's a significant change. But what if you go from 14 to 12.9? Well, what's your intent? Why are you doing that? Commingling metal finishing tank solutions and non-hazardous rinse water. So that's a dilution, right? Why are you doing it? What's the purpose of that dilution? Sorting chunks of steel painted with lead-based paint from sanding waste. So you're trying to separate out, because sand is not hazardous. You want to separate the sand from the hazardous lead-based paint. How about why are you sorting those? Do you want to manage them differently? One, you want to manage non-haz. One, you want to manage as a hazardous. So yes or no, is a tiered permit required? And you know, that's where we get into a lot of detail.
Right, and you're starting to now think about, well, not just what's happening, but why it's happening. Right? The alkaline cleaner that's been rinsed off, you know, if it's alkaline, is that going to be hazardous? Assume pH over 12? Sure. But you're rinsing it off the parts.
Is that rinsing, what's going to happen with that
Alkaline solution. It's going to get diluted, right? All right, so that's treatment, but you know, it's like, all right, well, the rinsing it off, is that kind of part of is that really the process? All right, yeah, that's part of the process. So pretty much easily right away, you're like, I don't care about that. That's part of the rinsing the stuff off, that's part of the process. Right? So whatever waste residue comes out of that generating process, that's where you make that point of determination.
And that's why the point of generation is so important on this, because
so
that's where it starts.
Yeah, so it's not like, all right, well, it's pH 14 on the part, that it's pH 14 waste. No, we're rinsing it off, and you may end up with pH 11 or pH 10. More dilute, aqueous, higher pH material that's not hazardous waste. Well, yeah, kind of treated, but that's not regulated treatment because they're not treating the hazardous waste. That's part of the process. The point of generation, it's not hazardous. Doesn't meet the hazardous criteria, right? Running parts through rinse tanks, similar, you know, is that a similar, you know, activity mindset? Sure. Changing the pH. Changing pH, is that treatment? Yeah, I talked about that before. But now you're going to want to think about, well, why are you changing the pH? For what purpose? Well, because we're changing it from 1 to 4.2 because now we take that 4.2 material and we use that in a different process. Are they treating a waste?
Yes.
No. If they're using that 4.2 material in a
but
different process, they're treating, but they're not treating a waste. They're tweaking or treating a process material that has that they're further using. So you're asking, well, why? What's the process? Show me. Same thing with the other one. Commingling. We're going to go through a specific example of this. When you're commingling spent solutions, right? You know, you take your spent plating shop solutions, you take your rinse water. When you commingle those, again, the question you want to ask is, well, why are you doing that? Well, because it's easier to treat that way. Well, what process benefit does that have? Well, it makes it cheaper to treat. No. Well, how does that help the part? How does that help the product that's being made? You know, it doesn't. What you're doing is, what's happening is after the actual generating process. You've already generated the rinse water, you've generated the plating solutions. Anything you do with that stuff after you've generated it, if it doesn't have reuse, that's treatment of a waste, and that is regulated. We'll see a specific example of that. And the sorting, you can go both ways, right? If it's lead-based painted material and that paint's in decent shape, is that a hazardous waste? Not necessarily, right? And, you know, getting the big chunks of lead-based painted material, you know, out of the sandblast booth so the sand can go off as a hazardous waste. You know, and then maybe that lead-based painted steel goes up to the steel recycler, right, as a excluded non-hazardous waste, right? That's sorting. You're not treating. Part of the we're generating this material, right? So this goes over here. That's, you know, that's really not waste generation. So that's not the point of generation. Find my button.
You getting thirsty?
Well, this pouring. Well, I gotta eat a lozenge or something.
But
what about? But while you're,
I'll pour you a water.
What about pouring? Just pouring from one vessel, to another. No, I mean, look at this.
Here.
Look at this guy.
Try-
Give me a second. Look at this guy. Actually, I have this in my house.
The Drinkinator?
Yeah, the Drinkinator. And it has two controls on it. Do you tip? Do you not tip? More or less? See it down there. So, would you consider that treatment? You're just pouring. Yes or no? Why not?
What happened?
Tastes like crap.
What? I got it right out of the
Is this
pitcher.
ground? Do they do? God dang it! Do they? Is this ground? Is this county water?
Yeah.
I don't know. You know what, Steve?
There's like a buttload of VOCs in there.
I think we should put our bibs on. I got an idea.
It's really high.
God, minerals.
I don't know what happened.
Crap, there's like VOCs or something.
Here,
Minerals. Like
we'll try a new glass.
This is a demonstration. This is a demonstration.
All right. I got an idea. Put it down on the floor. All right, here we go.
Wait, over? No, over.
I had it on. All right. Try that.
Fabulous.
Well, fix that problem.
You did. That was excellent. What's the difference?
So, I mean, you really have to look at why are they doing what they're doing. You got to ask a lot of questions.
We're going to try that one later. Yeah, it goes to intent. Right, so you go to a facility, right, and they've got a tank, right, and they're pumping water from, I don't know, groundwater, from some process, right? Where's the discharge pipe, right? You got maybe a 10-foot tall, cylindrical tank, right? So the pipe comes in the top. Does that pipe kind of go most down to the way to the bottom, and it's a bottom fill? It depends what's in there. If there's VOCs in that water, and kind of the intent is to lower those VOCs. If they're bottom filling, right, they're filling it up, yes, there's going to be VOC loss, but that's not really the intent. Any VOC loss is likely to be just part of the process of filling that tank, right? That pipe terminates way the heck up at the top of the tank, and they're getting a lot of air sparging. Hey, they're treating, and they know they're treating, and they intend to treat, right? And anybody that says no has not been in this class or seen that wonderful example, right? So a lot of it does go to intent. And you can't see it in this picture, but this thing was solid flame coming out of the snow. All right, so we know what's treatment, right? Hugely broad definition. Pretty much anything you do, even mind control to a waste, is going to be treatment. But the legislature, and there are all kinds of legislative changes and tweaks, and happens all the time. There's a lot of statutory exemptions that say, well, it's not considered treatment here in California, right? And there's a bunch of them. There's a couple of big ones that were added back in '98 in 251.23.5. Filtering liquids to remove the solid fractions without adding heat, chemicals, or pressure when adding to a storage tank or drum. This was known as the safety clean exemption, right? Somebody's got a bunch of... Actually, that would be the post office exemption because, you open up the box, it's, oh, good, my human head from back east came. That's why I don't put dirty words in my spell check, because thank you. We'll make that note.
It won't happen for another 10 years.
We've only had this on the slide for 13 years. All right. The safety clean exemption, basically, where they have a solvent and the cleaning tanks and all that, and they get parts and chunks of stuff in there, right? And they pour it into the drum with a little metal mesh filter. You're filtering it before it goes into the tank or into the drum so you don't plug up the pipes. Well, that's a physical separation for a particular purpose, right? So that kind of follows the statutory definition of what treatment is. But because that's so broad, legislature added, no, you know what? Just filtering out the solid stuff, without adding heat or pressure, just filtering out the solid stuff, that's not treatment when you're pouring it into a drum. So filtering it's fine, right? That's okay. Phase separation without adding heat or chemicals. Basically, when you're accumulating in a tank or a container, stuff's going to settle, right? Different densities, stuff's going to separate. That's not treatment. That's obviously a smart idea to exempt because that's natural. That's going to be happening. Right. So that's not considered treatment. Regulated treatment in California, or evaporating the water component out of a tank or a container, evaporating the water portion without adding heat or chemicals, except for sunlight. Right. That's not considered treatment. So according to this, you can evaporate the water, again, without adding heat or chemicals or pressure. So, this is drying sludge from a garnet cutting. So you got a bunch of solid stuff in here, right? And it's sitting out in the sun. Is the water portion evaporating? Is that considered treatment?
Is it regulated treatment? Is that what's happening?
My eyes. So is this regulated treatment?
What's the bonus
Question, Steve.
Can you do this? Why not?
It's not treatment.
There's storage issues, right? Can you have open containers? All right. So remember that as inspectors, they got to meet all of the requirements, not just tiered permitting requirements, but they got to meet generator requirements. Can you store in tanks that are open? Yes. But you can't store in containers that are open. And why is that? Because there's supposed to be things like freeboard in tanks. They're supposed to have high-level alarms, secondary containment. So there's more of an allowance for this situation than a container. Containers don't have to have secondary containment. They don't have to have high-level alarms. There's no freeboard level on it. So you're not allowed to do this. You ever see this at a facility? Yeah, okay. There you go.
And if they say, no, I am
actually removing the waste from the container for a bigger function?
not right. All right, so and there's a whole bunch of others that are in the health.
This is a good slide to have, though. I mean, here's a list of all of these different exemptions.
Yeah, what I would do, if I were you, well, I would put on all of these the specific health and safety code, citation and have a copy of that. Just see, but solidification, remember we talked about, what if you're solidifying so you could land dispose the solids? Is that treatment? Yeah. Is it regulated treatment? Not anymore. So solidifying in the disposal drum, right, like adding fly hull ash, fly hull. Help me. Rice hull ash, vermiculite kind of doesn't do it. To solidify the liquid before you land dispose it, no longer regulated treatment. How about cleaning and decontaminating process equipment? Washing out the tanks. You got to wash out the tanks and all that. It's not regulated treatment. That's why you can wash out. That's the generating process, and the waste is whatever the goop is that comes out of it. How about if you're at a food processing facility or a biotech facility? How about acid-base neutralization? I used to work for Hunt Wesson Foods. Some of our tomato waste streams were acidic, right? Because the fruit's acidic. Neutralizing that, they're the
Food Processing Association.
and some other folks got that exemption in there. And what if there's a facility that
Does both food processing and
is a biotech facility?
Or food processing and metal plating.
Yeah, you want to kind of be careful. And think about that when it's roast beef day at Coupa Conference, when you get that green sheen on that meat. Okay, what about getting the silver out of the photographic waste stream? Everything from the Kodak photo recovery buckets. It's not regulated treatment.
Not like anybody's developing it anymore, though.
Oh, let me tell you. Two of my big clients, Technicolor and Deluxe, they're so screwed. They're all going digital. What about consolidating or combining 2 or more waste streams, same container tank, if there's no treatment benefit. You just want the volume. You're not changing.
Ease of management.
Pardon?
Ease of management.
Ease of management. Remember, for any purpose. But how about if you're just making it just for easier management, but there's no treatment benefit, which is.
And you guys see this all the time. You got somebody who's got a flammable paint waste, and they've got paint solvents, and they just mix the two together and they send it off as paint-related waste, right? We see that all the time. What's the benefit for them to do that? Just ease of management. Are they trying to declassify it? Are they trying to get a lower classification of waste? You know, they started with flammable and mixed 2 flammables, and they're calling the waste flammable. So as long as you're sticking with the stringent. Now let's take an example like that. I have a flammable paint solvent and I have combustible paints. And I mix the two together and I manage it as flammable paint waste. Is that okay?
Yeah.
But what if I did that and then I wanted to say now I've diluted it and now it's combustible paint waste, not flammable. And it's not RCRA anymore, now it's non-RCRA. Can I do that? No, because I treated it to get it to a lower hazard, and that's not.
You know, in our example of, you know, going from a 0.5 pH to a 1.5 pH, so the TSD facility could take it under the permit, that would be okay under this exemption. They're still going to treat it the same way, right? So that's an example of that. How about puncturing? Again, we talked about passive phase separation. How about puncturing aerosol cans? How did that used to be regulated? Permit using or an exemption using certified technology, which doesn't work, right? You know, the aerosol can puncture and that big coalescing filter that was good for like 5 cans, you know, and then you could huff over it like some kind of steel 55-gallon bong. We are in California.
Not that you've ever tried that.
I coughed. I coughed you.
All right.
It's not covered under tier permit anymore. Now they're all universal waste. So do people still puncture aerosol cans? Only the dumb ones do. It's not like you're shotgunning paint waste, right? It's bad. It's just stupid and dangerous. All right. Well, how about treating laboratory-generated waste? Specific exemption. All kinds of conditions. Talk about that a little bit. All kinds of conditions, but that's allowable. How about crushing or draining oil and fuel filters? Exemption. Everybody.
Right.
Sometimes not well, but they do it. All right, and this is just not to go through this in any kind of detail, but you know, for research laboratories and academic laboratories, an EPA has a similar exemption for treating laboratory-generated RCRA wastes in academic laboratories. If you're an industrial facility, the EPA exemption doesn't count. This is fairly generic, but for most types of labs, certain volume-limited hazardous wastes can be treated at the bench top, essentially point of generation, but at the bench top. Certain conditions. The procedures have to be recognized by a laboratory treatment authority, such as, you know, listed in the National Research Council or Prudent Practices for Management of Waste in Labs. As close as practical to the point of generation, not in that building, 3 buildings over across the campus, limited to a fairly small amount, to a certain limited weight or volume. Single set of procedures. The person doing the treatment basically has to be knowledgeable, you know, and qualified, etc. You can't use any graduate student. You have to use the smart graduate students, and you have to keep certain records and so forth. I will tell you that if you've ever gone through the prudent practices of the National Research Council, it's very generic. It's really generic in terms of, well, wait, is my waste stream listed? Is my process listed? It takes some interpretation. It really does. But there is provision for that.
Yeah, one of the big issues on that was formaldehyde, because people were treating it and it wasn't published. They corrected that, they've got it published, and now formaldehyde's not an issue.
Yeah.
And Steve, you can see in the previous one, he didn't put the code sections, but in the detail here, you've got the code section of where to find it.
except when I didn't put that on there. But what fun would that be?
Yeah.
All right, a couple of other ones. Drum rinsing or crushing isn't necessarily exempt.
Right. Part of it, as we go through the flow chart,
Part of what may
exclude you or exempt you from your
requirement for a tiered permit
is what you
do with that residue or that treated waste after it's been treated. Right? Sometimes
what happens to that waste or material after it's been treated gives somebody an exemption.
that then applies all the way up front. As a quick example, crushing a container. What's one of the requirements for a 55-gallon steel drum previously contained hazardous materials in 22 CCR 66-261.7?
Okay, so
Basically no portable residue, nothing dripping out, nothing you can slog out of there, right? Not that 1 inch EPA nonsense, right? We're talking truly empty. What else?
Go to recycler.
Yeah, that drum has to either go to a recycler, scrap, reuse, drum reconditioner, right? So can you chuck it in the trash? Not meet the exemption. You take a 55-gallon drum, completely empty. You pit. Pardon me? There's a guy.
That's reuse.
There's a guy in Texas. He and his son put in jail for slicing 55-gallon drums in half, making self-lighting barbecues. Went in jail in Texas. So you know how bad that was, right? If you chuck that drum in the trash or you use it for barbecue, right? Is it still a hazardous waste? It is, right? Because it didn't go to a recycling drum. All right. So you take a drum and you crush it. Right now you got the steel frisbee. Is that treatment? You're crushing, right? It's treatment. Does it require a tiered permit? It does, unless, what do you do with that crushed steel frisbee? You into the recycling bin. It's not a hazardous waste. Did you crush a hazardous waste? You did not. No tiered permit. Into the steel furnace. No, you're recycling it. Into the trash. Still a hazardous waste. You've treated a hazardous waste, tiered permit. So for some of these, it depends on what you do with that waste after you've treated it. And drums are a good example of that. So they say, yeah, we're crushing drums, but we don't need a tiered permit. What do you do with the drums? Oh, we recycle them. Well, do some dumpster diving per Vince. Get that I love dumpster diving sticker, right? And verify and see. See the records from the drum recycling. All right, air pollution control systems, right? So you have metal contaminated emissions coming out of a plating shop. They run it through a pack tower scrubber, right? Maybe with some neutralizing material in it. Are you treating the contaminants in that airstream? You are. Big, broad exemption for pretty much any kind of air pollution control system that doesn't require a tiered permit. One of the big reasons is the vast majority of those air pollution control systems require some air district permit that manages that system. Treating groundwater, pump and treat systems, treating dry cleaning solvents, recycling those, treating those, exempt from tiered permit requirements. It's not considered tiered permit. There's a bunch of other issues, right? If you go to the advanced hazardous waste class, they'll talk about sumps, below-grade treatment systems, wet floors. Don't you have a wet floor class?
No.
All right. Last year there was a wet floor class, and you could get the materials online. Point of generation issues. So there's a lot of other issues that, again, need to be determined. And don't forget about transportable treatment units. I think we're going to talk briefly about those later. Okay, what about transportable treatment? Right.
Talk about them now.
How about temporary household waste collection facilities?
Say that fast.
No. What about permanent household waste? Those typically will require a permit by rule.
What's the last one?
That's the
verbal.
That's the written
Version of our example. and how
can you get climb up on the table and not
Good reason.
that's where you need the structural engineer.
Another important definition. Treatment does not include combining two more waste streams. We covered this, my paint example. The waste streams are being combined solely for the purpose of consolidated accumulation or storage. Just basically ease storage or consolidated off-site shipment, they are not being combined to meet a fuel spec or otherwise be chemically or physically prepared to be treated, burned for energy value or incinerated. So you're not doing something to crank up the BTU value so you can ship it all off as grade A fuel. The combined waste stream is managed in compliance with the most stringent of the regulatory requirements applicable to each individual waste stream. So that was the example. I have a RCRA flammable and a California combustible waste. I'm mixing them together to make it all California combustible. They can't do that per this section here. I have to meet the highest, the most stringent tier or category.
All right, so here's an example. This is
The multimedia portion of the program. All right, so you have 3 process tanks, right? Three different processes, A, B, and C. Process A generates a hazardous waste stream. Process C generates a hazardous waste stream. Process B generates a diluted non-hazardous waste stream. And the facility says, okay, well, I have this tank here, my D tank, that's just my holding tank, for it to go off to my waste treatment system. I don't fall under tiered permitting, or I can just get a conditional exemption because of where I fit in the flow chart, because this stuff, not a lot of metals in here. Not a lot of metals in here. All right, so here's my conditional exemption application. What are you going to look at? What's the concern here? Again, is this treatment, what's chemically or physically happening in this tank? When you combine different waste streams, what's happening to that? Are you just making more of individual waste streams? No, there's going to be some dilution. There may be some chemical physical change going on, some kind of chemical reaction going on. Maybe it's simple dilution. But what's happening in here? When you're commingling waste streams, you really need to know what is happening chemically or physically in this tank. And in this particular example, when you're mixing, maybe that's a metal-containing acid stream, metal-containing acid stream. If that's not hazardous, no matter what's happening in that tank?
Dilution.
How
often do you go to a facility and, the generator only focuses on what's happening here? Yeah, we know what this is. This is a blah, 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 blah. But the things you have to ask is, well, what was this? Yeah. What was this? What was this? A lot of times they have not made determinations. They have no analysis on what these are. Is that going to matter for what ends up here in D? It's going to make a huge, significant difference.
Yeah. And just from a safety standpoint, are they going to blow up or gas somebody out if they mix these? And in certain, some operations, it's like, well, what's the method of generation? Well, we reach under the tank, we crack the valves when we want to treat it, flows out through the combined pipe or treatment system, and maybe there's a surge tank, holding there because we do batch treatment. Well, what's the characteristics of that combined material? How does it compare? And if they say, well, we have analysis of these, and here's the analysis, right? Well, another question is, is the process of discharging these 3 tanks into the waste, how consistent is that? Does it happen the same way, the same volume every time? Or, sometimes we do more B and C tank, or A and C tank, or A and B tank. Then that's going to be a variable waste stream in here. And that may change the nature of the treatment. Most of the time, maybe the treatment that actually happens in here would fall under conditional authorization or conditional exemption, for example. But maybe, it's like twice a month when we run the really good stuff, that would end up being permit by rule. So you really need to have a good understanding of the nature of the generating process and how variable versus consistent it is.
Depends on what other process happens after.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
It could be accumulation tank until they filter out all.
Right. And we're going to get to them when we start talking about treatment units. There may be 3 or 4 different treatment processes after that. So, is that 1 or more treatment units, and does that entire holistic treatment unit, which may include whatever's happening in tank D, and the filter system, and the flock tank, That's all part of one treatment unit. So yeah, you need to have the holistic view, but
Right.
this kind of goes to point of generation. The point of generation of this waste, it's here, not here.
So need to ask a lot of questions.
And get a lot of answers. Right, and this is the one slide that talks about 3 other all-day classes. You know, there's a lot of things that are exempt, right? So some things are exempt in the advanced class and the recycling class, but like on-site recycling for on-site reuse. Generated waste, you know, you recycle it on-site in the safety clean solvent minimizer, some solvent reclamation system, some waste treatment system, reverse osmosis ion exchange system for dilute plating rinse solutions. You're treating it, but you take that plating rinse water that's now been treated, put it in a holding tank, use it back in the facility for reuse as a rinse water, exempt. On-site treatment for on-site reuse. It's conditional. You have to be able to use the majority of the waste that you're treating. You know, we're treating 1,000 gallons a month of plating hazardous rinse water, but we're able to reuse 700 gallons of it. That's most of it. Right? It's the majority of that waste. On-site recycling of off-site generated wastes. Very conditional. Health and Safety Code 251.43.2 D gives you some conditional exemptions for that.
And the used textiles would fall under that too.
Yeah, you have used textiles.
The 25-144C.
We can't remember much. I have to look at my license before I answer the phone every day, but we know code.
Tweeting a WECO waste.
Is he still there or did he retire?
Who?
Jim. From DTSC. Anyone here from DTSC? There was a guy in an agency up in the state. Smart guy. Nice guy. Looked like Elmer Fudd, talked like Elmer Fudd. And we'd sit in a class. Well, this is a WICWA waste. And I have no idea what he said after that. Smart guy.
Because you had tears coming out of your eyes.
I have my faults, but holy God.
All right, so I think we've kind of talked about this, you know, but this is the actual code section for the exemptions. It's got to be exempted by RCRA. If it's not exempted by, remember, tiered permitting is a California rule. So it has to not be regulated under RCRA. It has to be excluded by RCRA. If it's not, then it needs a Part B permit. You can't do that type of treatment. So basically what it comes down to is if it's not on here, if it's not on the flow chart, then you end up having to go for a full permit. So the common ones are wastewater treatment units, and this is what you see people treating on-site, discharging to a publicly owned treatment works. And you know, what are they doing? They have a waste that maybe is 99.9% water and 0.1% hazardous waste. It makes it all hazardous waste, but the actual amount that's hazardous is that small fraction. So what are they doing there? They're separating the water from all the other stuff. They're discharging the water to a treatment facility, and they're managing the waste. So the EPA allows them to do that. Elementary neutralization units, totally enclosed treatment facility.
Now, a totally enclosed treatment facility sounds like a big facility, right? Totally enclosed treatment facility. Treating waste generated by the process from a direct pipe. You can't take a drum, bring it to a system, pour it in, and treat it. That's not totally enclosed. Connected to the generating process by a pipe, treating without releasing any hazardous air components during the treatment, and essentially discharging to a sewer system. The wastewater treatment units in the totally enclosed treatment facility basically the same thing. Your typical, familiar with plating jobs, your typical plating wastewater treatment system that discharges.
Right. So it's almost like it's in a process. Yeah. It never comes out of the process until it's non-hazardous.
Right.
And then the treater is conditionally exempt small quantity generator. Remember, RCRA does not care about anybody that generates less than 100 kilograms per month. They're not in the RCRA world. If you're not in the RCRA world, you don't have to follow RCRA rules. But you're still in the California world, and you still have to follow California rules. So then you are allowed to do treatment under California rules. And then treating an accumulation tank or container within the allowable accumulation times of the 90, 180, 270. And that's basically, that's like the phase separation in a tank, and then you separate out the two. Anything else on that one, Steve?
No, but I mean, you know, you have the accumulation tank or container. Well, I have acid stored in there. Why don't you dump a bunch of that bicarb in there? It's not smart, but EPA allows it, right? It would be regulated here in California. There's not a lot of treatment in most facilities that doesn't meet one or more of these exemptions.
What's the most common thing you find that doesn't meet one of those?
Treat it, okay, you have a treatment system, like let's say your typical plain wastewater treatment system, right? Dump the tanks, they all go in the system, flocculation, right? And there's a separate, you know, they have a separate gold plating operation in a different room, right? Like, well, you generate a little bit of this stuff, these 5-gallon buckets. Well, why don't we just run it through the treatment system? Fine. Put it in the buckets, put it in the 5-gallon pails. You walk it over there into the accumulation tank, and then it runs through the whole system. That's not a totally enclosed treatment facility. Doesn't meet the definition of a wastewater treatment unit. I always have to go back to the specific definition. That it's not going to happen often. The more jerry-rigged a treatment system is, the more it's not connected to the generating process, the more likely it is not to meet a requirement. But these are really, really, really broad.
Probably the biggest thing we would see is people treating off-site generators. It's very easy to break the rules if you take waste from off-site.
And off-site could include your facilities department B that's half a block down the street, and you bring that's off-site generated waste. Another quick example. Let's say a facility, they're not connected to the industrial sewer. There's a ton of facilities out there that aren't. Maybe they have a discharge pond. Maybe they have an evaporation pond. You know, I'm not too sure they should have gotten their water board discharge requirements permit for that. Right, but I've got one client facility that everything they do on site, everything they have on site goes to a wastewater evaporation pond, and then it percolates. They can't do any industrial treatment out there because they're not allowed to discharge that waste. And if they did, they wouldn't meet this exemption because it's not going to a publicly owned treatment works.
The reason that it's so broad is EPA wanted to give businesses the ability to take the volumes and concentration of their waste and reduce it on site without having to get a permit. Because that's basically what they're doing. They figure if you're taking it from off-site, you're in the business, you need a permit. But if you're dealing with your own waste to reduce the hazard, to reduce the volume, they wanted to exempt that, to allow that. Because it's going to be reduced from going off-site. It's going to be reduced in hazard. Those are all good things for the environment. So that's why there's so many broad exemptions for that.
Yeah. Plus, they look at if it's going to a POTW, you're likely to have, public owned discharge treatment unit, treatment system, wastewater discharge permit, or if you're going to direct discharge, you have a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System NPDES permit. Right, so you're otherwise regulated.
All right, so what do we know so far? If you have a hazardous waste and you treat on site, and it was generated on site, and that treatment is not exempted as direct use, reuse, on-site recycling, then you probably need a tiered permit. But does that mean you're eligible for one?
Maybe. Maybe not. So now we'll take a break very shortly.
Yeah.
So now what you want to start thinking about, we're going to go through in more detail after the break is, all right, so you have an on-site generated hazardous waste, and you want to treat it on site. Now the kind of information that needs to be known both by the facility and by the regulators and the CUPAs, what's the volume being treated per day, per batch, per facility, depending on the tier. You need to know, which of that it is. What's the concentration being treated? And again, what's that concentration based on? A single sample, or much more representative sampling? How consistent is that? How close is it to the limit? That kicks you from one tier into the other. I mean, if it's really low, nowhere near that limit, probably less samples are better depending on the consistency of the waste stream. If they're right up near the top of that threshold, you really want consistency in that waste stream. So sometimes they're over, sometimes they're under. That makes a difference. How is that waste going to be treated? What the methodology is? What's the post-treatment concentration? For some of the tiers and some of the waste in the combinations, what tier they fall under may depend on what's the post-treatment concentration. Not just what's going in, but what's coming out. So they may need to know that. And if it's a WICWA waste being treated, is that treatment exempt from RCRA requirements? That. And then how many treatment units do they have or will they have? And what's the fireball? What's the potential compliance issue with this word right here? When somebody shoots in a tiered permit set of applications for tiered permitting, say, this is what I have, this is what I'm operating. Any potential problem with that? Who said that? Mr. Prize over here. What did he say? He said more than they're already doing it. You have to at least submit it first. That's good enough. You have to submit it first. You can't just fire it up. All right, here's what's happening, and send it in. It's like, no, you're going to write it out, send it in, then fire it up. All right?
All right. So you want to take a 10-minute break?